Hey, PLM Mastermind, how is it going? My name is Ryan, aka Fitz, and today we're going to be looking at 3 betting preflop in 5 card PLO. So let's jump straight into the video. And the first thing I want to talk about is a bit about the reasoning for 3 betting. And when you do want to 3 bet a hand or you're thinking about 3 betting a hand, you probably should have an idea as to why you are trying to 3 bet and stick to these sort of principles. And if you don't think your hand achieves any of these things, then it's pretty likely that you don't want to go ahead and 3 bet. So the first one is going to be domination, and this is going to be probably the biggest reason why we are 3 betting a lot of hands. We have a hand that wants to build a pot. It has a lot of equity. It has a lot of nuttiness. It's doing very well against our opponent's range, against his calling range. And as a result, we want to go ahead and build a pot. Pretty straightforward. One of the other reasons, or the next reason, is going to be pushing. And this can be if we are trying to, for example, push equity against our opponent's raising range. Perhaps he has a hand like King King, and we might have a hand like Ace Queen Queen. And in that case, we benefit a lot from getting his hand like King to fold. Maybe we have a hand that has a straight draw that would draw to a straight that includes a king in it, and we benefit from King King folding. So maybe a hand like Ace Jack 10, or that has Ace Jack 10 in it, is going to look to push those hands out. The other thing as well, not only can we push equity from the initial raiser, but we can also push out players behind us. We often have hands that maybe have a lot of domination potential, but they don't necessarily play the greatest multi-way. They maybe don't have the best nuttiness, and as a result, they want to push out the opponents from calling and creating a large multi-way pot. One of the final reason, which isn't as common, is being able to negate the out of position disadvantage. When we have a look at the 3 betting hand classes, you'll see that when we are out of position, we tend to 3 bet different hand classes, or at least there is some differences in position and out of position 3 betting ranges. And some of those categories benefit more from lowering the SPR, because when they're out of position, they have a difficult time playing. Whereas in position, it's a lot easier, obviously, at a high SPR as well. You can leverage that polarity, and being in position at a higher stack to pot ratio is beneficial. So those are sort of the reasons. Let's quickly jump into some of the frequencies. So if we start off with MP versus EP, we're going to be looking at a roughly 5% frequency. This is going to be the tightest 3 betting range we have. And it's also important to note that when we look at the MP 3-bet range versus early position, it's going to be the same frequency and roughly the same range as when we are in the button and cutoff versus EP as well. And this is a consistent theme across in position 3 betting, is that when we face one position, so let's just say we face an early position raise, we are going to be 3 betting roughly the same range from each position that is in position button, cutoff, and MP. The same is true for when we face an MP RFI and we're in the cutoff and button. We're going to be 3 betting at a relatively similar frequency and very similar hands. So just something to keep in mind, that maybe you only have to study one particular spot. At least your 3 bets, your cold calls will obviously extend the closer you are to the button. And in terms of button 2 cutoff, which is going to be our next frequency, we're looking at an 8%, so a slight jump. And we're obviously facing a bit of a wider open raising range from the cutoff, and as a result, we get to 3-bet a little bit more. We jump down to the small blind versus button scenario, where we 3-bet against the button. We're going to be looking at an 8% frequency again. But as I mentioned before, even though it is the same frequency, this time, because we are out of position, our range is going to differ slightly, and we'll look into what hand classes are sort of 3-betting more or less a bit further on in the video. And then the button versus small blind scenario, we're going to be 3-betting 11% as the big blinds. Sorry, big blind versus small blind scenario, I should say, not button versus small blind. And this is going to be the widest part of the game tree in terms of our 3-bet percentage. And we're obviously facing a wide small blind RFI, and we're also never going to be out of position post. We're always going to be in position. So that has a lot of, gives us a lot of reason to 3-bet a little bit wider. So when we are deciding to 3-bet, what are the kinds of characteristics of a hand that we want to pay attention to? Well, the first one is going to be nuttiness and also high card strength. these two sort of go hand in hand. And if you watched my pre-flop basics video, you'll understand that these are the core components we look for when we are playing a hand pre-flop. And also the same is true for when we do decide to 3-bet as well, not just open raise, is that we are looking for really strong components in these areas. And that is basically going to enable us to dominate our opponent much more often and also have playability post-flop and that kind of thing. So those are sort of the two of them. But there's two more I want to focus a bit more attention on. And the first one is going to be our suitedness or our suits. And the reason why I want to bring a bit more specific attention to this is because it's very important that not only are we often going to be double suited when we 3-bet in 5-card Omaha, it's also really important that we pay attention to whether our hand is double, triple suited or double suited pure. If we have, for example, 2 high suits, or we have 1 high suit and 1 low suit. If we have, say, for example, we have ace queen, and if you have the ace queen of the same suit, it's going to be a lot less value when you have, say, maybe ace queen 6 with the ace and the 6 suited. So we'll see an example of this here. You can see a hand like ace queen 10 7 6, where we have double suited hands, but we are double triple suited, so that's going to lose a bit of value if compared to a double suited pure hand. But also notice the thing about that is going to make us 3-bet this hand compared to the next hand we will see is that, for one, even though we are double triple suited, the triple suit is with the lower suit and not the nut suit. And that's really important because being able to unblock our opponent from having lower flushes when we hold the nut suit is really important. And also not having, in this example, the queen of hearts, we have the 7 of hearts, which just means that it's much more likely our opponent is going to have a stronger flush draw when we unblock those high, the king high, the queen high flush draw. If you look at a very similar hand, which is ace queen 10 7 6, which looks very, very almost the same, you can see here there's 2 differences that is going to make us call when we are, instead of 3-bet in the button versus cutoff scenario, is that one, we have the triple suited to the ace to the nut suit, which is bad or not as good. And then also we have the queen of hearts in this instance. So making it less likely we run into a hand like this third nut flush, the second nut flush, that kind of thing. So do keep in mind that it is very important that we pay attention to these things when we are looking at 3-betting a hand, because even the small differences can actually make us change our decision, as you can see in this example. And this is a very common occurrence. The other thing is going to be connectivity. And we want to really focus on our connectivity in a bit more detail as well, because depending on how many gaps we have or where the gaps are, is again similar to suitedness. Those small details is going to tell us whether we should 3-bet or call a hand. So we have a look at this hand like king 8 7 6, double suited pure. You can see that the 8 7 6 is all no gapped, and as a result, we have a really strong hand. We can 3-bet this button versus cutoff. But if we look at an almost identical hands, but instead in this hand we have the 5 of clubs, we have the gap at the bottom, our hand is now going to become a call as well. So you can see that there's even these small differences is making up is having a big impact on our pre-flop range. So let's go into a few hand examples and get a bit of a feel for what kind of hand 3-betting in certain scenarios. So we'll start off with MP versus under the gun. So we face an under the gun RFI, and we have the option to 3-bet, call, or fold. You can see on the left we are 3-betting at a 5% frequency. So what kind of hands are going to be 3-betting? Well, if we start off with our unpaired hands, the 5-card rundowns are going to be doing the most 3-betting. And that's because they have the best connectivity and often come with a lot of nuttiness if they have high card strength. So if we look at a few examples here, the first thing you will see again is that we have nuttiness, we have a lot of high card strength for the most part. But if we don't have that high card strength, we back it up with other components like very pure connected. So 10 9 8 7 6 has no gaps, and even though it doesn't have that high card strength, it is able to 3-bet because it is pure connected. But as soon as we start being a bit more disconnected, we need other components to back us up. Also, one thing to notice is that in this scenario, but also somewhat in other scenarios, when we are 3-betting, we have an unpaired hand. It's very, very likely we want to be double suited. Ace, Queen, Jack, 10, 8 single suited is one of the very few or almost the only combination of single suited unpaired hands that are 3-betting middle position versus under the gun. And that's because it's just so likely to have a double suited hand in 5 card. If we look at our 4 card rundowns, the frequency drops a fair bit, but you can still see common characteristics of high card strength, connectedness, double suited, often double suited pure, and also that nuttiness as well. So you can see even a hand though like King 10 986, which might come as a bit of a surprise, is going to be 3-betting, and this is going to be for similar reasons as the 10 9 8 7 6. Is that we have we do have some components that make us want to 3-bet, but we lack in those very nutted components, and as a result, we want to push out our opponents that are behind us and get heads up, and we have good smooth equity distribution on the flop. We flop a lot of draws. We flop very well on a lot of different textures. So even though it doesn't look like the greatest hand in terms of our nuttiness, we still get to 3-bet some of these hands. But do notice that we do have the 2 high suits, and we are double suited pure, and our gap in the 10 9 8 6 is at the very bottom. So don't go too overboard with these hand classes. And again, we mentioned before, if we have less of one component, we need more of another to make up our hand into a 3-bet. Also, I do want to mention that unblocking the king can be beneficial in some scenarios with hands like ace jack 10 8 6, because we can push out hands like kings, as I talked about initially in this video. But the thing is, in 5 card, there's going to be a lot less folding to 3-bets in general, and as a result, unblocking that king isn't as substantial for our 3-betting range compared to 4 card, where you'll often see unblocking the king being a feature of hands like ace jack 10 8, those kinds of things, especially when we're looking at 4-betting as well. When we look at 4-betting in 5 card, you'll see that pattern as well, but 3-betting, it's not really there. So I just thought I would bring that up. If we look at some more unpaired examples, we can see here, again, very strong connectedness. The ace king queen has no gaps, the 5-4 has no gaps, that kind of thing. Double suited pure. And also if we look at our 2 Broadway hands, neither of this hand class are 3-betting that much, but again, they all have similar characteristics in them, you can see. And you can also go into PLO Trainer and check out those frequencies, or those quiz yourself as well, which I highly recommend doing. But again, the more of one component, or the less of one component we have, the more we need of the other. So with ace king queen 5-4, we don't really have the greatest high card strength, so we need to back that up with good suits, with good connectivity. And also, again, notice in a lot of these hands, they have very few gaps, or at least they have like 3 cards in a row, like king queen jack, or that kind of thing. So, or 8-7-6, for example. So do keep that in mind when you look at sort of these more ragged, or these less connected hands. If we look into our paired hands that are 3-betting in this scenario, aces is going to be about a 71% frequency. Not all of them are going to be 3-betting. We do need some kind of connectivity or suitedness, or we have some kind of backup. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and just call our aces. In terms of our other paired hands, there is very, very few that are 3-betting in this example. You can see 0.1% of all other paired hands or double paired hands that aren't ace-ace basically are 3-betting. And they're going to be ones that have an ace, double suited pure, and are often very connected. So like ace 8-8-6-6, sorry. Ace 8-8-6-6 is connected. It has double suited pure. It has the ace, that kind of thing. So drawing to the nuts, the nut suit, that kind of thing. So those kind of hands are able to 3-bet, but there's not really very many others that are, at least in a scenario where we are facing a tight open raising range. Moving on from here, I do want to look at the button versus cutoff range and mainly focus on where we are expanding our range. So you can see, if we look at our 5 card rundowns, we go from a 13% frequency of 3-betting from MP versus EP to a 20% 3-bet frequency when we are on the button versus a cutoff RFI. And you can see all of our unpaired categories do expand at a significant amount, often at least half, they're often increasing at least double the frequency. So you can see 3 Broadways is even increasing more than that, from 6% to 14%. But if we look at some of the hands, we basically still have the same component as we talked about before, but we can sort of be a bit more relaxed in terms of our requirements. You can see a hand like ace, king, queen, jack 10. It doesn't have the nut suit. It's not double suited, but because we are facing a wider open raising range, we don't need those components because we have the very high card strength and connected hand. And the same goes for our other examples. They're just sort of a bit relaxed, but still taking from the same 4 hand classes primarily in terms of our unpaired hands. With ace-ace, we are increasing our frequency a little bit, and now almost 100% of our double suited aces are going to be 3-betting. In terms of our 2 pairs, also a really big increase. It might not seem like when you look at 0.1% to 1%, but if you think about it, it's 10 times as much 3-betting. You can see we start to 3-bet hands like even king, king, 8, 7, 6, which is double suited pure. It doesn't have the ace, which was a requirement when we were an MP, for example. So just some sort of examples here, but feel free to go into the trainer and quiz yourself and do a bit more detailed study. But the last thing I want to look at today is going to be when we're out of position and how that, I guess, differs from our 3-betting range in position. So we saw before, if we go back to the previous slide, button versus cutoff, if you look at the top left, you can see our 3-bet frequency is 8%. And if you look at small blind versus button, our 3-bet frequency is also at 8%. But there's going to be some hand classes that 3-bet less and 3-bet more. So if we look at all our unpaired hands, we do have a small drop in our unpaired hands, but that is made up for by our 2-pair hands and 1-pair hands. They tend to go up a little bit more. And you might think, well, we're probably 3-betting ace-ace a bit more, but we actually tend to 3-bet ace-ace a little bit less and cold call that a bit more instead. But the hands, or the paired hands that we are 3-betting a lot more now, is going to be our Broadway pairs, our double paired and our single paired Broadway hands. And this is because we talked a bit about it before. Some hands, they don't have the best playability when they are out of position, and they want to negate the decrease the stack to pot ratio in order to realize their equity easier to negate that out of position disadvantage. And Broadway pairs like kings, like queens, like jacks, they're all really good at doing that. Particularly like kings, for example, is that they have a lot of equity against most of our opponent's calling range, but they have a hard time realizing equity when they are out of position at a high SPR. So we tend to 3-bet those hands a little bit more when we are out of position compared to in position. If we have a look at some examples that are 3-betting small blind versus button, but are calling on the button when we are facing a cutoff open raise, you can see that a hand like ace, king, king, 8, 7 with the non-nut suit, and even ace, queen, queen, so ace, queen, 10, 10, 9, they both have the non-nut suits. Even the top hand is single suited as well. They're going to go ahead and 3-bet. Having that ace blocker is really important for the most part, but we do even start 3-betting hands like king, king, 10, 10, 7, single suited. But we still have all those components that we talked about before. But now, again, we do get to 3-bet some more of these Broadway hands that are, especially the single suited variants as well. And as I mentioned before, this is mainly because we have that poor playability as out of position. So we'll just go through a quick summary of what we have learned so far. So when you are deciding to 3-bet a hand, make sure you are considering what your hand wants to achieve. What is sort of the objective or reasoning for 3-betting? Do we have domination potential? Are we pushing out equity or pushing out opponents behind us? Or are we trying to, I guess, negate the out of position disadvantage? The other thing we want to consider is whether or not we have the correct characteristics within our hand itself that makes us want to 3-bet. Do we have that high card strength? Do we have that nuttiness? And also, do we have the suitedness and connectivity? Make sure you're paying close attention to the nuances in the suitedness and connectivity as well. Also consider whether we are in position or out of position. We saw that the Broadway pairs do start to 3-bet a bit more when we struggle to realize their equity as the out of position player. So that'll be it from me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know what you thought. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.